Good evening to viewers and listeners, and welcome to the January 9th edition of Beyond the Headlines. We thank you so very much for joining us, whether it is a part of our family, Grenada Broadcasting Network, or whether you're joining us on social media or part of the GIS family. Welcome. My name is Colin Dow, and I'll be your host this evening on Beyond the Headlines. Let me just start off by quite frankly saying a Happy New Year. I know 9 days have gone, but it's still important to still say Happy New Year on this first engagement. And it's an absolute pleasure for those of us here at GBN to welcome our first guest for 2023, none other than our Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Dickon Mitchell. Prime Minister, welcome.
Good night, Colin, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and let me take the opportunity, like you, to wish all of our citizens a Happy New Year. I certainly want to ensure that you are healthy in 2023, because I want to be able to tell you Happy New Year in 2024. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to us having our chit-chat tonight.
And chit-chat it is. So, you know, I was never known to be a fast bowler, so there'll be no bouncers. All right? But, you know, as you start off, it's 6.5 months of being Prime Minister of Grenada. Share with us what maybe the surprise, the unexpected part of this job that you've had to take on over the last 6.5 months.
Well, I don't know if it's part of the job, but the surprise has been how many photographs I've had to take. You know, everywhere I go, someone wants to take a picture with me, so that was definitely surprising. You know, sitting here, I was reflecting on when did it first start happening, and I'm not so sure. But certainly that has been a noticeable feature, certainly of any public engagement that I've had. So, you know, if I go out and someone doesn't ask for a picture, I'm surprised. But the truth is, it almost invariably leads to someone asking. I guess someone has to be brave first, and once that person asks, then everyone else tends to follow. But it's fun. It means that people obviously are happy to take the photograph. It also means we live in an era where obviously content creation, so to speak, is dominant, so photos go with that. The other aspect of it, I think, is just the fact that you and to some extent, part of it is that you know, I've had several requests for speaking engagements, both within Grenada regionally and internationally. Several of them I've turned down simply because I've said to people I've been elected to be the Prime Minister of the country, not to be a public speaker regionally or internationally, because you obviously have to balance the public speaking engagements and the actual job. So that has been a bit surprising as well. But in terms of the job itself, I think I knew it was going to be a lot of work. I've gotten some of that and more. And for me, it's just making sure that I remain healthy and that I remain focused on doing the job. Okay.
We have had lots of comparisons. So the celebrity status is there. And, you know, sometimes I'm hearing, oh my, he reminds me so much of Barack Obama. And other times I'm hearing, oh, Morris reincarnated. Don't let that go to your head. But the idea really is, have any of those leaders influence your political philosophy? And if so, in what way have they shaped your approach to governance?
Well, first let me say any comparison to Morris or Obama is flattering, perhaps even bewildering. I think for starters, both are fantastic orators. I mean, that's clear. Both of them can move you with their words to tears, to laughter, to joy, to perhaps accomplishing things that you didn't think you could accomplish. In the case of Barack, he obviously would have been a transformative leader in the sense that he would have been the first African American to have assumed the highest office in the U.S. And I think for many persons of African American background, or Africans in the diaspora, the thought of a black man being in the White House in their lifetime was probably, you know, it's just something you didn't think would happen. And so you could understand why people were moved to tears the day he was elected president and when he was sworn in. He has a very affable style, easygoing. Morris, obviously, I think was a very, very passionate person, very transformative, and very selfless. You know, one of the things that you have to admire about the persons who led the revolution is the fact that they were never about material aggrandizement for themselves. It was really about building the country, and they did so in many instances, making the ultimate sacrifice. So from that perspective, from the fact that leadership is really about service and not about trying to accumulate things for yourself, I think Morris obviously stands out in that regard, perhaps too much so, because not only did he make the ultimate sacrifice, I think in a sense his family also made the ultimate sacrifice. His dad died. His daughter grew up without essentially a father. So I think I would certainly say the sense of knowing that leading a country is about serving rather than trying to get things for yourself. I think Morris really epitomizes that. He was a brilliant orator. He obviously was a good lawyer. He could have stayed in his comfort zone and live a nice middle class life. Yet he sacrificed all of this, gave all of that up, and basically spent several years fighting for the improvement of Grenadians. So I think for all of us who engage in public leadership, and I think that's critical, and in public service, that is essentially what it is about. Right. It's about service, and we need to remind ourselves of that. So to that extent, I would certainly say Morris's passion, his selflessness. I would say Barack's easygoing, kind of cool style is certainly something that appeals to me, because at the end of the day, service is about human beings, and you have to be able to relate to people. You have to be able to have empathy for them, and you have to be able to laugh at yourself at the end of the day. I think Barack also, has that ability. When you listen to him, the jokes he gives, that sort of thing.
Right. Okay. Let's get into it. You were elected on a platform of hope, speaking about Barack Obama, and there came the transformation agenda. Elected on it, first 6.5 months you spoke to it. As we got into the budget, it was one speaking of transformation, but there was a tone of caution in your New Year's message. Is that a contradiction, or how do you see that New Year's message preparing one, and meaning the population, for the sacrifices ahead in order to accomplish this transformation agenda?
Right, well, to transform Grenada and to really improve Grenada in a sustainable manner, it's a long-term process. It's not instant coffee. And so, for instance, when you engage in a budget cycle, it is a one-year cycle, but we do have a midterm plan. We do ultimately have a long-term plan. And as a nation, I think it's important for us to begin to accept. For instance, if you want to improve your education system, there are short-term goals, there are medium-term goals, there are long-term goals, and we need to remember that. And it is not just a question of feeling good. It is not just a question of the easy fixes. Countries that improve, the citizens make sacrifice. People work hard, and you have to work hard every day. It's not a situation where you work hard today and then you take the rest of the year off and you think you're going to improve the nation. It is something you have to consistently do. And so the tone of caution that you may hear in the New Year's message is to say that we live in a world full of uncertainties, and therefore we need to ensure that as citizens we are prepared to commit to working hard. We are prepared to showing up every day and doing what is required to gradually and consistently improve the country. But I think once you spell out the vision, once you say where we are trying to go, the next step is to say how we get to where we want to go, and then brick by brick point at what you want to do in 2023, what you want to do in 2024, 25, and beyond. And
well, you have won. You've read the budget, so it's now a time of how and implementation.
Yes.
It was very interesting to me that the pillars that you outlined, and the 6 transformational pillars that were identified, you started off with healthcare. Why healthcare?
Well, and that's why I wish everyone, a healthy 2023, because without health, you pretty much have nothing. I think it only comes home oftentimes when you're sick, that you're pretty much useless to yourself, and you probably make everybody else around you miserable. So the reality is we need a healthy nation. We need healthy citizens, both emotionally, physically, mentally, if we are going to improve Grenada. And so that's from a general perspective. But the reality also is that if you actually look at our healthcare services or healthcare industry, we face some significant challenges. Chronic non-communicable disease. That is the pandemic that we face in Grenada. Our physical healthcare facilities are in need of significant improvement. Our primary healthcare is in need of significant, not just the physical facilities, but the actual healthcare services that are delivered is in need of significant improvement. We could take a simple example like dental healthcare. And if you poll Grenadians, you would see the extent to which our oral and dental healthcare needs significant improvement. And these things have significant long-term impact on your overall health and your overall well-being. So if we want to be able to produce a nation that is successful, the citizens must first take care of their health. The citizens must be healthy. And there's another aspect of it. Significant sums of money is spent on healthcare that is after the fact. Right? And so you are spending money on things that are avoidable, preventable, but yet still we don't avoid them, we don't prevent them. And we get to a point where, let's take the significant increase in kidney and renal diseases, almost all of it attributable to lifestyle. Right? So you find a situation where then the government has to take resources away from education, away from agriculture, away from infrastructure, to essentially care for citizens who otherwise, had they taken care of themselves, would not need the care. So I think it's very important for us to take care of ourselves first and foremost. If we're able to do that, then I think we would be well on our way to being a better nation. But I think there's also another aspect of healthcare, which is healthcare is an industry that I think Grenada is well poised, if done properly, to bring significant economic benefits and economic transformation to Grenada. So you see, we've not just talked about the preventative healthcare, we've not just talked about tackling chronic health, non-communicable diseases, but we've said we want to make Grenada the healthcare capital of the OECS. So the long-term goal ultimately is to get citizens from the OECS, citizens from around the world, to actually want to come to Grenada for the healthcare.
But let's address it. I was going to go there a little later on, but you brought it up, so let's address it. The reality is that we probably have the largest English-speaking medical school in the world.
Yes.
The reality is that the institution in Grenada is the largest provider of physicians to the U.S. healthcare system.
Yes.
And yet, this is what we have in terms of a Grenada healthcare system. The reality is that Grenadians travel to Trinidad, travel to Barbados, travel to the U.S. for healthcare. The reality is that we've seen the likes of Antigua targeting the OECS with oncology, for example, and nothing in Grenada. Is that an indictment on our leadership? And what will your administration be doing starting in 2023 to make sure that we are the healthcare capital of the OECS?
Well, yes, to answer the question, I think it's an indictment on our past leadership. St. George's University has grown over the last 40 years. Our national healthcare should have been growing simultaneously with that, so that the level at which SU is, the national healthcare infrastructure, as well as our services, should have been there, and that has not happened. In fact, to some extent, we've regressed, because certainly, this is my opinion, I certainly think our healthcare in the 80s and early 90s, or primary healthcare in particular, was superior to what we have now. When I looked at the sort of primary preventative dental healthcare I got in primary school, I have no doubt that is what has stood the test of time for me to allow me not to have cavities today. So I think definitely it's an indictment on our lack of planning, our lack of investment, and our lack of vision in terms of saying what do we need to ensure that our healthcare services grow concurrently with that of St. George's University. Let's take the business side of it, the teaching hospital. We had an opportunity between 2008 and 2013, and significant work was done towards advancing us to a place where we could have a teaching hospital. The administration changed and it was abandoned. In my humble opinion, it was a foolish decision, and we're paying the price for it 10 years later, which means we don't have to start from scratch. So what we intend to do is, in this year, we intend, one, to acquire the lands that will allow us to build the new hospital. And we do not simply wish to build a new hospital for building a new hospital's sake. A country doesn't get the opportunity, certainly with Grenada's size, to build a hospital every year or every 5 years. So what we really want to build is a transformative healthcare hospital that allows us to, so to speak, future-proof the hospital by ensuring that we focus on a relationship with SGU that could allow that hospital to become the teaching hospital for persons who are attending SGU, so that they get a chance to do their rotations in Grenada, thereby increasing our tourism by an additional 2 years. That's one. Two, we want the hospital to be at a standard that allows tourists from all over the world to want to come to Grenada for elective surgeries, etc., etc. When people travel, they tend to be a lot more daring and a lot more ambitious. So whether it's cosmetic surgery, etc., etc., we certainly think there's an opportunity for us there. Thirdly, we want Grenadians in the diaspora to feel confident that when they come home, they can get the level of medical care that they deserve. And fourthly, we need our citizens as well to benefit from the level of medical care that they deserve. So we see a clear relationship between medical tourism, between the teaching hospital, between the first-class healthcare services that our citizens deserve, and between the diaspora. So out of all of that together, we feel quite confident that there is a significant opportunity for us to leverage St. George's University, but also to ensure that we can deliver first-class services for our citizens.
You spoke of acquiring lands as a first step, and you did say, it is a long-term process. Have lands been identified, one, and two, what is the modulus, twofold here? How are the lands going to be paid for, and how is the hospital going to be built in terms of the actual funding?
Right, so lands have been identified, and lands were identified as far back as 2008. So yes, lands have been identified. Well, the government has to pay for the lands. I think for us, we would probably want to get to the point where we have firm agreement on the actual purchase before disclosing how we pay for it. But I certainly think the government would either have to pay in cash or kind. And I'm saying cash or kind here is in actual cash or a combination of cash and bonds. There are a number of financing options that are available. In terms of the model, we have not settled on the model. I mean, there are a number of things that you can have a bolt arrangement where someone actually builds it, finances it for you, and then ultimately, you can always purchase it back. You can do a joint development, public-private partnership. So there are a number of options that we are looking at. But I think because it's a process, we feel first you need to demonstrate that the land has been acquired. I think it's important to send the clear message to the public in 2023. This is step one. That allows you to say this is the land. It then allows you to develop the concept, to do your designs, your plans, your drawings, and to have the kind of technical work that is required to get you to the point where you can say to the public, we have 3 or 4 options. These are the options, have the consultations, and then we agree as a nation which one we wish to pursue. And then we look at how we finance it and the time frame for building and construction, as well as who our partners will be, etc.
Okay. Physical infrastructure. Let's deal with the human resources.
Yes.
It was noteworthy that you announced in the budget $500 honorarium for all nurses for the next 12 months.
Yes.
For 2023. Is that a signal of 2 things? One, I believe that our nurses are underpaid, and 2, we are short, and we are attempting to set up barriers to prevent more migration to the north.
So in simple terms, the answer is yes to both, but it's also a signal of our intent. Process of recognizing that we need to build our healthcare human capacity, build and retain it. So it's not just the payment to our nurses, but we recognize that if we are going to get the first-class healthcare services that we require, we're going to have to start now from significantly increasing the numbers of Grenadians who study in all fields related to healthcare. Not just doctors, not just nurses, but all of the support services that is required to create a modern healthcare system. So one of the things we've already begun looking at is, in fact, seeing how we can skew our resources to attract more Grenadians into the healthcare field so that they can study, and so that we can get into arrangements with them that when they complete the courses of study, that they come back to Grenada to begin building the human resource capacity that we need to get us to where we want to go.
Let's speak of how do you actually intend doing this, because we do know scholarships are given. Probably close to 300 scholarships are awarded each year across various disciplines, and yet still the return rate in healthcare, one may argue, is poor. Folks sign bonds, they don't necessarily honor those. So what strategy have been discussed at the government level to ensure that we're able actually to build capacity and diversify in terms of specializations from the nurses, the physicians, the allied health disciplines, all of which you alluded to earlier?
Well, I think part of the challenge has been the fact that there has been no intent by past governments to signal to persons who get into that field that the government is serious about healthcare. I think that's just the starting point. Second, we have to accept that if you look at the conditions under which persons in all of those fields work, if you look at their remuneration, no effort has been made, in my view, to differentiate the fact that we view their skill set as important. No effort has been made to signal that we are prioritizing healthcare. So for us, those are the starting points. But we also recognize that, in a sense, very concrete steps have to be taken to treat with that. So let's take the number of specialists that are required in Grenada. how many of us, as average Grenadians, actually know how many specialists are required?
Right.
How many of us are told? How many kids in secondary school are told, okay, for a country like Grenada, you need to have X amount of specialists per population size?
Right.
Those things are not discussed. So when young persons go about their business, their career, they're thinking about themselves purely. No one is giving them the guidance to say, as a nation, we want to become a first-class healthcare center in the world, and to do so, we will need 1,000 nurses, or we need one nurse per every 50, or one nurse per in nursing, allied healthcare practitioners, not just for general practitioners, but for specialists, etc., etc. And that we are giving you the opportunity to come back. But I also want to make the point, it's not just about being physically in Grenada, because you can help Grenada, you can improve our healthcare, and you don't necessarily have to be here. When we start deploying the technology that we think is critical, I think we can get some of that first-class services. Even the Grenadians were to study, specialize, and migrate, they can still contribute via telemed. They can still contribute via virtual health rooms. The technology is such that a surgeon can guide another surgeon to perform surgery that hitherto he may not have been able to do without the technology or without the surgeon being physically there. So I think it's important for us to recognize that there are a number of tools that we can use to help bolster, retain, encourage our medical fraternity in general to want to contribute towards the development of Grenada. And then there's the diaspora. Right. And then there is the St. George's University alumni. So I think if you add those two together, in my view, there is significant capacity already, but we have not deliberately targeted or harness them. And I'll give an example. And this is in no way to take away from the tremendous support and help that we've gotten from the people and the governments of Cuba and the government of Cuba. We have a deliberate policy, a deliberate MOU that we entered into with the government and people of Cuba for them to provide medical support to us. We have hundreds of Grenadians in the medical profession, in the diaspora, and there's no formal arrangement between the government of Grenada and Grenadians in the diaspora. What's stopping us from having that formal arrangement in place? Nothing, except willpower and the desire to do it. So the same way in which, for example, we provide housing for the Cuban brigade, it's the same way we can offer, and they may not even need it, housing to a diaspora medical fraternity to say, if you come to Grenada and you give us 6 months or 3 months or 4 months per year, we'll take care of your accommodation. Right, we'll take care of the transportation. And I'm sure hundreds of Grenadians will freely give off their time. Let me give you a simple example. A young doctor pointed out to me, she returned to Grenada, volunteered her time at the hospital. She had to pay a license fee to practice. I'm saying, I heard this, I'm like, but this doesn't make sense. This is a Grenadian medical doctor. All right. We have shortages of all kinds of specialists and shortage of medical doctors in general, who's coming back to volunteer her time during her vacation, mind you. And she's asked to pay the license fee to practice. And I'm saying that should not be the case. Yes, you want to ensure that her medical criteria is intact and that she's duly licensed, etc., etc. But that should not be something that you are charging or making money off, when all the person wants to do is volunteer to help address some of the challenges we have in the medical field. So that's just a simple example of how bad policy, or frankly no policy, impacts negatively on our ability to deliver better healthcare for our citizens, even when people are volunteering. So I think, again, that's where we have to have the deliberate policy drawn up, entered into, publicized, so that we can encourage almost immediately, in my view, members of the diaspora who are interested in helping out in various areas come back and do so. And we can do so very deliberately. We can be very targeted. And I think if you do that, we can almost overnight begin the process of improving, at least, access to some of the specialists and so on that we need to help improve our healthcare.
Okay. You may recognize this quote. Transforming our healthcare system is the single most important priority for this administration. Now, I think whether it's Webster or just say Collins Dictionary, we define transformation as a thorough or dramatic change in form or appearance. Given that commitment, quote from you in the budget, and the definition of transformation, I ask you to turn your attention to the Maribor. How are we going to transform the services, at Maribor to better serve our people in general, but of course we're thinking St. Andrew, St. Patrick?
Yeah. So I think it's the same it's the same basic principle that applies to Maribor, ultimately will apply to a national hospital. First, we have to have the human resource capacity, right? And we have to be prepared to do what is required to get it as a starting point. And then second, we have to take care of the physical facilities that come with it. And there has to be a real commitment to do so. Part of the problem has been everything is ad hoc. You need an X-ray machine, so you get it today, the machine comes, then it breaks down, there's nobody to service it. Do you have the kind of quarters that would permit a doctor or nurses to be relatively comfortable, bearing in mind the job they do, to be there 24 hours? So those are some of the basic things that we simply have not paid attention to.
Can we expect in 2023 at least a human resource audit of the healthcare system so that we're able to see we need X number of doctors and the breakout will be so many that are general practitioners, so many specialize in oncology, so many? Can we expect at least movement in this in 2023?
No, certainly, and I think the data is already known. I mean, if you swap places with me and the chief medical officer, I'm sure he can tell you the number of specialists we need, the number of specialists we don't have, what areas we need them in, etc. So I think medical professionals who are already in the system already have that information. I think that the crucial thing is really for us to talk about it and to ensure that the policymakers, people like myself, get it. In my interaction, in my very limited time interacting with some of the medical professionals, the impression I got is that the former policymakers were not interested in having the conversations about how we build our own capacity. Right? It was always, in a sense, perhaps narrow focus on what is happening. And maybe it's because if you can afford to jump on a plane and get medical care elsewhere, it didn't bother you what happened to the rest of the citizens. But for the rest of us, we have to get medical attention in Grenada. And so it's important for us to pay attention to that. And that's why I'm saying, in my view, there are opportunities right now that we can begin to address from our health centers, our medical stations, including Maribor, to ensure that we can start beefing up the services there. So you may be aware that we have unlocked 21 positions within the healthcare sector for us to be able to treat with the capacity deficit that has happened. And that is because we recognize, notwithstanding that we have fiscal rules to comply with, that we need to ensure that we really make a determined effort to give the human resource capacity that is required to the healthcare sector.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. And viewers, it is time for us to take our first break. We'll be back soon.
Am I talking too fast?
WeatherGuard Pro. For every project, there's only one Pro.
Total is one of the world's largest oil companies with a top quality line of lubricants. Total Lubricants has a full product line from passenger cars, motorcycle, heavy industrial equipment, mining, trucking, agriculture, and manufacturing machines and vehicles. Total Lubricants, winning championships in motorsports, including Formula One and World Rally Championships. Total Lubricants are available at all Rubis service stations, leading automotive shops, and distributed by Huggins.
We all have wishes at Christmas. Maybe it's a car, repairs to your home, new appliances, or travel. Get yourself that perfect gift with a GUT Credit Union Christmas Make-A-Wish loan. You can get the money you need to make that holiday wish come true. Apply for a loan and you'll be entered to win one of 5 shopping sprees at Foodland Supermarket. Plus, great prices from Sol AC Limited, Dean Mattresses, Digicel Grenada Limited, and Beacon Insurance. Call 440-1354. Email loans@gutcu.com or visit go.gutcu.com/Christmas. Apply now and make your wish the perfect gift this Christmas. Special conditions apply.
Looking for expert in sounds, stage and lighting engineering? Double D Sound. Song reinforcement and public address system. Rentals for concerts, weddings, meetings, conferences, live shows, parties, and crusades. Double D Sound. We also sell all types of musical instruments, accessories, and replacement parts. You looking for intercommunication and programmable bell systems, especially for schools? Double D Sound. Looking for amplifiers, speakers, keyboards, matching drums, wind and percussion instruments, transistors, and more. We rent stages of any size, concert stage, lighting, party, tents, tables, and chairs. Call Double D Sound, 405-9685. Hearing and feeling the difference. Double D Sound.
Have you heard about the new Soft Weave bathroom tissue with total hygiene? As hygiene and safety have taken center stage, our bathroom tissue is now manufactured with 3 different technologies to offer the best protection for you and your family. UVC light technology for a safe and effective disinfection process, eliminating 99.9% of microorganisms. Also, production at high temperatures, killing all types of germs and bacteria. And it's pH controlled with delicate fibers to prevent irritation for even sensitive skin. Soft Weave Total Hygiene Bathroom Tissue, available in supermarkets and shops island-wide. Visit Soft Weave Caribbean Facebook or Instagram pages for more information.
If there was ever a time to keep and stay healthy, it's now. We at Hills and Valley are here to help you take deliberate steps to maintain your health. We stayed true to maintaining the most comprehensive rates while stocking the widest range of medicines and health devices, including personal protective equipment. There are so many benefits shopping with us. You get great savings through discounts for senior citizens and reward cards for loyal customers. Ask about owning yours today. Visit us at Halifax and Grenville Street, St. George, Jubilee Street opposite the Grenville Bus Terminal, and at Hillsborough, Carriacou. Our wholesale distribution on Halifax Street also stocks the widest range of pharmaceuticals. We are with you on the hills and in the valleys. We are Hills and Valley Pharmacy.
Wait to see my granddaughter. Weather Guard Pro. For every project, there's only one Pro.
Welcome back, viewers, to the January 9th edition of Beyond the Headlines. We have in the studio Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell, and we are speaking healthcare, mainstay of the transformational agenda. Prime Minister, 10 plus years ago, the journey to national health insurance began. We sit here in 2023 and still nothing. What commitments can you make to ensure that there is a national health insurance that will improve access to health care for Grenadians?
We are very committed to ensuring that national health insurance occurs. We have allocated $2 million in the budget cycle this year for this. We've inherited a situation. The government already had a contract with JIPA, who has done extensive work on national health insurance. So we are committed to seeing that through. We recognize the importance of national health insurance because we recognize that, and I'll give a simple example. You know, it's all well and good if you get a cut or even a broken limb, for instance, that generally our hospital and perhaps government services and maybe even out of your own pocket, you can take care of it. But anything beyond that requires serious surgery, or any sort of terminal illness, or illness that requires lifelong management, oftentimes the average person, perhaps 9 out of every 10, is simply unable to afford it. And what health insurance permits is for you to be able to meet those costs, particularly where you have catastrophic injuries or lifelong diseases that you need to manage. You know, the statistics show that medical emergencies, illnesses is perhaps the number one individual cause of bankruptcy amongst individuals. And I think persons who've experienced that will know what I'm talking about. You have a job, you're diagnosed with cancer, you can't work because you have to get the treatment, you can't afford the treatment, and effectively your quality of your life spirals out of control. It impacts your children, it impacts your spouse, etc., etc. Now, national health insurance is really the buffer against that sort of dramatic decline in your standard of living as a result of a health or medical condition. It's not a panacea for everything, but it certainly would help to dramatically increase, in my view, the chances that our citizens can survive and withstand and cope with major medical illnesses or challenges or emergencies. So we're committed to doing so. But we recognize, because of our small population, that it can't just be private medical plans, that there has to be some element of a publicly funded national health insurance, which we all contribute to as a larger pool, so that ultimately we can benefit from that.
What is there any thought on it? I mean, are we thinking of a consumption tax like VAT? Are we thinking of a levy like the environmental levy on the electricity bill? Are we thinking of yet another levy on salaried employees like a personal income tax? Has there been any thought there?
Well, I think various models have been put forward. I think from where I sit, the approach should be to get as many persons as possible to actually contribute towards the national health insurance, because healthcare is no respecter of salaried or unsalaried, employed or unemployed. And the current model we have is where essentially taxpayers' money, whoever pays taxes, from persons who buy food, everybody pays taxes because VAT is essentially on almost everything, where essentially taxpayers' monies are used to fund. So we have an expense-driven model. There's a budgetary allocation, and essentially it's fixed, and we have to make do with that sum. There's no revenue model associated with it. And so even now, we're only now beginning to put measures into place that allows for persons to pay for medical services.
Well, that was the next one I was going to, because we don't necessarily have to wait for a national health insurance. The reality is that if one goes to a physician, they would fill out the form and they reclaim if you're employed and you have health insurance as part of that. When you're actually ill, you go to the hospital for 3 weeks, you eat, you get medical attention, you get drugs, etc. And then if you're manageable, you say thank you.
Yes.
When will we see a point of service payment regime within our healthcare system?
Well, we will see this year. We have already begun recruiting staff, because this requires obviously 24-hour service, because if I want to leave at 3 o'clock in the morning and I've gotten services and I want to pay for it, I should be able to pay for it. So the plan is to implement this year, because we recognize the importance of it. Sometimes non-citizens, visitors, tourists, etc., similarly may want to pay. Sometimes they have health insurance that they can use, and we have no system in place. So I think it's the baby steps matter, because you're going to have to build brick by brick, block by block, step by step. So it's just beginning these simple processes and putting the procedures in place, putting the human resources in place from the revenue side to what I would call start collecting and stop the constant leakage. I think that will begin turning the tide on some of those issues, because that's part of the challenge, and that's part of why healthcare services are not the best, because once you have a fixed amount of money to spend, essentially it leaves you with no room to get additional revenue to treat with many of the things you've done. And you just gave the example. If everybody consumes, everyone benefits from the expenditure, but there's no revenue side to it, then it's just a matter of time before you will end up in a situation where you just don't have enough resources to be able to give the quality care or to retain the quality personnel or to pay them better. And then we have all of the issues. People are demoralized, people are working in terrible conditions, etc., etc.
I spend lots of time on healthcare. One final question. I noticed 0.5 million dedicated towards Carlton Home. We lost Carlton Home, close to 20 years ago.
Yes.
There isn't a alcohol or drug rehabilitation center in Grenada. Unfortunately, some people have been sent to the Mount Gay facility. Would we in 2023 see movement on a Carlton Home type facility? And is the 0.5 million sufficient? I don't know what the budget for building and what type of start date.
So the 0.5 is clearly not sufficient. You can't build a proper facility with that. But I think the starting point for us is you have to assess the state of the building. In fact, there are a lot of good Samaritans who have been volunteering. I wouldn't call her name, but who's been leading a team who go and clean up the site to prevent it from being completely overrun voluntarily. You may also be aware that there's some private corporate citizens who've been leading the charge in terms of raising funds and setting it aside, I think, at the Grenada Cooperative Bank, so that when the government is ready, there's some matching funds. So I think from what we see, the first step is to assess the state of the site and to have the experts tell us whether the site is still adequate for the purposes for which we want it to. If it is adequate, then obviously we then have to look at how we start cleaning up the sites, how we start looking at the concept, the drawings that are available, because it's really meant for design technical works. And then once we get that, the next step then will be certainly by the next budget cycle to then have appropriate funds to actually begin construction of a home. We are committed to this, and it's one of the issues that very early on, upon assuming office, that we looked into, and we've in fact spoken to some of the folks in the private sector who had that fund at Corp Bank about this, because we recognize we do have substance abuse challenges in Grenada, alcohol abuse challenges, mental illness challenges exacerbated by COVID-19, and we got significant mental challenges sometimes and emotional issues, behavioral issues amongst young persons as well. So it's important for us to care for citizens' mental health. And so you'd see the Ministry of Health is not just health, but it's also well-being, and in a sense overall well-being, including our spiritual well-being. So we are definitely committed to this. And I believe there's an opportunity, again, for us to target the diaspora, to target the St. George's University alumni to assist us with programs like that.
Okay. The next thing that I noted, and you came to know our business sector. Care to expand?
Well, I would start perhaps by saying this. Let's take the state of Grenada. The state of Grenada is an island nation. We're surrounded by the ocean. In fact, our territorial space is more sea and less land. What in our education system pays attention to that reality? Nothing. Swimming is not taught in schools. Fishing is not taught in schools. You probably have to wait till you get to SGU to perhaps do a degree in marine biology. But to a large extent, the primary and secondary school education is not really tailored to that. And so you ask yourself, what is our actual reality? Our reality is that we're an island state. Does our education system make us conscious of that? We pollute the sea. We pollute. Okay, let's look at the skill set that we need to survive in a marine economy. Boat building, boat maintenance, boat repairs, fishing. Is our education system tailored to any of that? Formal or informal? Largely the answer is no. What you have is, if your family was a fisherman, then hopefully you learn. Or if perhaps you happen to have a friend whose parents fished and you hung out with them, you get the opportunity to learn to do it. Boat building to a large extent is only done in very limited circumstances, in a very hands-on, practical way, and you train, and that is passed down from generation to generation, from person to person. But who's documenting that skill set? You know who's documenting it? People from Finland, people from Denmark, etc. Not us. And I'm saying just there, we ask ourselves, for those of us who are in policy-making decisions, those of us who are leading education, have we stopped and taken the time to ask ourselves this question? We haven't, because we've continued in this almost robotic mode.
So let me go along that line. It heartened me likewise about sentence number 3 or sentence number 4 in the budget. You went to TAMCC.
Yes.
Again, near and dear to my heart.
Yes.
Let's following up on what you said. Can we see in 2023, 2024, some type of movement towards a marine science, marine technology department or offering at TAMCC? And I say this on the backdrop that we have marinas. Cruise and yachting has been promoted as one of the major parts of the tourism sector. We have a Port Louis where mega yachts come in, and the reality is that in order for work to be done on any of those yachts, we have to import the labor. What decisive decision, utilizing a TAMCC or otherwise, the administration intends to make to ensure there is human resource capacity building in that area?
So whether it's TAMCC, whether it's new law, whether it's frankly brand new skills training centers, and I'm going to start there because I think that's in a sense a very real and practical sense, because part of the challenge with education is also addressing unemployment, particularly amongst young person, and you want to give the skill set that allows you to be deployed almost immediately in the economy. And I'm happy you've articulated this way. I probably couldn't do it any better, because I know for a fact that the marinas are importing labor. But there is no methodology in place to train our people, right? And that's where the education system comes in. That's where the National Training Agency comes in my view. That's where the reviewing our curricula comes in, so that we should be able to go out literally and poll all of the marinas, all of the shipyards, and say, tell us what you need, not just now, but tell us what you need for the next 5 years, given your projections in growth, etc., etc. And tell us what is the skill set, what is the training, including you helping us to build that curricula, so that we can then go out and say to our young men in particular that these are the jobs that are actually available in the marine industry. This is what the marine industry is about. These are the kinds of skill set units. This is the type of training you need. And if you can't get all of it in Grenada, then we'll certainly be happy to train you elsewhere and get you back. Because the truth is, to me, that is one significant area that will address some of the unemployment challenges that we face. And it's not just the infrastructure in terms of the ship yards or the docks or the marinas and so on, but it's also the soft stuff that goes with the marine industry. And we could take just the cruise industry as an example. It's the food, it's the flowers, it's the all of it which goes with it. And oftentimes, again, as you said, when these big boats come in, they can't even find the food to supply them, because again, sufficient knowledge isn't given perhaps to even our farmers to say, outside of the cruise ships, there are these mega yachts that are coming in. This is what they require. Who's telling the farmers that? Where is that information being channeled, right? And that's part of the challenge we face. Where is our MNIB in that arrangement, so that you can get the data, you can mine the data, and then pass it on to our producers and suppliers to say, Port Louis needs X amount of this or X amount of that. So that is what I mean when I say I don't think our education system, both in a formal and informal sense, has been paying attention to what is actually happening in our economy.
Let's just switch. Again, I'm sticking to TAMCC because it's our indigenous tertiary institution. What type of investment is being made to ensure that TAMCC is a critical part of national development? And as you answer, we spoke of the marine science, marine technology. Think in terms of agriculture, yes, as you respond to that.
Right. Well, the Maribo Farm School, which is essentially TAMCC, has been neglected. There's no other way to describe it. And we have to pour significant investment back into Maribo. But on a more national level, we are pursuing a loan with the World Bank, targeting specifically TAMCC. We are hoping that the approval will occur this year. We are looking somewhere in the region of 12 to 15 million US dollars, essentially to address this whole question of our skills gap and the modernizing of TAMCC, so that we could really turn it into an elite institution. So the goal here is not just for Grenada, frankly, because I think we have to use SU as a bit of a model. If you build infrastructure, if you have the quality teachers, trainers, educators, if you pay people well, and if you create the ambience that comes with the institution, then you can turn it into a first-class institution that can attract persons from Trinidad, Guyana, the rest of the Caribbean, and afar. So ultimately, that is the sort of goal that we want for TAM. It wouldn't happen in 2023 or 2024, but I certainly think we have the ability to really turn it into a model center of excellence for things like what you've just described.
Well, let's continue on education and that model and the type of development that it can thrust. At the CXC Ministerial Summit held late last year, you boast of being a Caribbean-educated scholar.
Yes.
Of course, your degrees.
Well, I don't know if I'll call myself a scholar.
I said scholar, I believe you said professional, but I'm the one saying scholar. But you did indicate you are a University West Indies trained professional. 10 years ago, third largest land grant in the university's history, 89 acres awarded in Hope. 2012, I believe, was the signing. We're in 2023, and there is nothing.
Yes.
What will your administration, well, how do you see the government partnering with UWI to transform education in Grenada?
So I would say this. I mean, we haven't had the discussion yet with UWI, and I think obviously that is going to be one of the key things because, you know, in addition to transforming healthcare, I think for me the next natural area that we can have a competitive advantage in is in education tourism. So to that extent, if we can have another university, and particularly my alma mater university, given that it's just celebrated its 75th anniversary, with a campus in Grenada, it is something that obviously I will go to heaven to achieve. So in terms of if the opportunity still exists, obviously that is going to come about with a conversation with UWI. If the opportunity still exists, then it's certainly something that we would want to pursue vigorously. But we do recognize it's 10 years later. And as we say in Grenadian language, we've lapsed and lapsed badly. But it's for us to pick up the pieces and to begin to jumpstart it to see if we can go again. I certainly think it will do wonders if we can have a campus in the northern part of the island, because it would then have the opportunity to really explode economic activity in that area. We've seen what St. George's University has done for the south of the island, and certainly given the spectacular beauty of the northern part of the island, having a campus in Hope, in my view, would have the potential to transform the entire northeastern and northern part of Grenada. So, you know, to quote Dr. Alexis, hope springs eternal. And I think it's a question of if you are still interested. I know.
Prime Minister, will we draw a line in the sand? We have donated 89 acres of Grenadian territory to the University of the West Indies. What we have seen, and I'm not going to go St. George's University, but look at the Five Islands campus, which came in after that land grant was given, and we can see the type of development that is taking that part of Antigua. So are we going to draw a line in the sand saying we need to have some movement, and are we going to have some level of conversation on what we want to see done there, whether it's a focus on agriculture or something, but at least have some input as to what type of training takes place there in keeping with our developmental goals, and one will argue that of the OECS?
So the answer is yes. I mean, in fairness to the university, it's not their fault. Nothing has happened there. So I think the onus lies on us, the government, to decide how we wish to proceed with that. If it turns out that we are unable to come to terms, then obviously we want the land back. So that in a sense, that line is clear. But my expectation is that it's unlikely that we will get to that point. I think the leadership of the University of the West Indies is very keen to continue promoting education, and they've repeatedly harped on the fact that if you want a country's GDP to grow, you have to invest more of your GDP itself in education. And so to that extent, I think we're in sync in terms of our general approach to say we actually need to invest more in education if we want our nations to continue to develop. So I would certainly say this. You can perhaps speak to me in the next 3 months, and we can perhaps let you know how things are progressing.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll keep it to that. Yes. Just moving on, what 2023 strategy, and I'm changing gears here a little bit, is going to be adopted to elevate TVET? And I know that you made some indications of the importance. You spoke of your own primary school education before. I know that you have been an avid supporter of NULO, for example. And are we going to see, as part of Prime Minister's Dickon Mitchell's legacy, TVET centers or skills training centers in every constituency and every parish, recognizing the need for this form of training?
Right. If not in every parish, then certainly I think as an integral part of our high school, secondary school, and tertiary school setup, because I think it's absolutely vital for us to do so. Strategically, though, I think it's important from a PR and a communications perspective that we re-educate our minds as to what is education. Because the relentless focus on academic credentials has been superior to TVET credentials and TVET skills, actually is fundamentally, in my view, undermining Grenada and to some extent the OECS's progress as nations. Because the shortage that we face in skills is actually hurting us and hurting us badly. And so even when you do things like construction, we have big hotels being built, the skills have been imported. Right? So you have a situation where the development model is flawed because you're granting concessions to bring people in to invest. They then take the money. They're not paying you taxes. Right? They then take the money and send it back out to import labor. Because we have not skilled up our people sufficiently enough to be able to do the jobs that are available. And it's not just in the primary construction stage, but it's then in the maintenance stage. So for example, do we have hydraulic engineers here? So you have people building hotels, they're building elevators, and then you import someone from Trinidad to maintain an elevator in 2022, in 2021. So that is, and a lot of that comes from the fact that we still have a situation where we value, and that is important, academic credentials. And therefore, from a communication point of view, we have to spend, in my view, a lot of time hammering home, repeating that your TVET skills, your TVET certificates is as valuable, in my view, if not more valuable.
And can I posit here that we probably misuse the term academics? Right. Simply because I will challenge anyone who says that a mechanic is not academic. They're different. I guess we have to find a name. Right. But we probably need to culturally change this idea of academics versus TVET, as though TVET is not academic, and it is highly skilled and academic. So we probably have to, as part of that transformation agenda and adjustment of mindset, have some different terminology that would be able to elevate it, certainly in the minds of our people, and go after it, including sharing how lucrative those disciplines are.
Absolutely. It's highly skilled. It perhaps requires even more discipline than some of the traditional academic, and in many instances is far more lucrative, and as well as gives you far more flexibility in terms of the job market. It's the one area where you are probably likely to be a small business owner or be self-employed compared to some of the straight academic type subjects. And I think that flexibility, that empowerment, and the ability to work on your own time, when you want, how you want, and to be able to employ other persons, I think it's important for us to stress the advantages of some of that type of education, that type of training. And I think if we're able to do that, then people will begin to see, that there really is, frankly, nothing wrong, and everything is right with pursuing a TVET type education.
You mentioned a number of times, we need to have the right people. We need to train. Government gives a large number of scholarships. Are we going to see in 2023 a relook at our priority areas? Are we going to see targeted scholarships awarded for national development? Or is it going to continue to be carte blanche, everybody gets for whatever, and not necessarily geared towards the pillars that you have identified and the skill sets that you have said are lacking?
Well, you must have had a fly in the wall of the cabinet room this morning, because that type of discussion is the sort of discussion that was taking place. For the simple reason, you have scholarships, and you look at what people are getting scholarships for, and is it tailored to our actual needs? And so we recognize that we have to take a deliberate policy to say these are the areas that we need to beef up our human resource capacity in. I'll give an example: engineering. It's a major area where we have significant shortages of engineers, and therefore the scholarships need to be targeted to that. Obviously, the healthcare sector, right? And I just cite these as two examples. So we cannot continue to simply allow, and to some extent they probably simply not guide, our students coming out to just simply go pick what I would call a normal routine type stuff, which leaves them frustrated because oftentimes you go and you get these degrees. And the question is, what are you doing with them in the context of Grenadian society? And there are lots of it. I mean, I'm not knocking psychology, but if you are not actually going to pursue a career along that path, should we allow our students to go and spend 3-4 years studying psychology and they come out and they're looking for an administrative or clerical job, right? Or should we not say to them, we need significant persons in horticulture, in marine biology, in engineering, in interior decorating. I'm using those types of things because these are skill sets that are actually needed. You have hotels that are being developed here. Who's going to help 4-5 years from now when they need to redo all of this stuff? Do we again go back and hire someone from overseas to be able to tell you how you do the deco, etc., etc.? So those are the skill sets that we need to be able to say these are the things we need based on the type of economy we have, and actually ensure that the scholarships, the tuition assistance, travel assistance are geared towards being more targeted in terms of some of the areas that we need. So I'll give you an example. Vets. We have a vet school. We have a shortage of vets on the island. And so even today we were talking about whether we can in fact get more scholarships in veterinary science to address the fact that we are trying to encourage poultry. We are trying to encourage more livestock, and therefore we need human resource capital to help our farmers and so on. We are encouraging to get back into those.
You spoke of this rearranging of mindset and probably directing students towards areas that are geared towards national development. Does the administration have in mind an ideal Grenadian citizen? I know that we talk about the ideal Caribbean citizen, the ideal is there an ideal Grenadian citizen? Is there a move to say at the end of grade 6 a Grenadian should know X? And related to that, is there a movement to introduce across all forms, and certainly in the lower forms, social studies, which will teach Grenadian students about their history, about their culture, about their heritage, so that coming out of that, we can ensure that youngster, that 12-year-old, that 13-year-old actually knows about Grenada, and not just the history, let's say, in keeping with the CSEC curriculum.
Yeah, absolutely. We've already begun introducing Grenadian history at the primary school level. And to be quite honest, my view would be that has been made mandatory. You must know your modern history. And I say modern in particular because I think it's important to understand Grenadianness. We've been taught a lot of colonial history. A lot of it is not accurate. And I think that affects our own mindset and psyche in terms of how we see it ourselves. So the teaching of Grenadian history is, in my view, something that we should make mandatory. We have a lot of authors who've written our history. And so it's not like there isn't a situation where you can't say you can't find materials. We have, I would dare say, perhaps in the Caribbean, the richest modern history, and something that we should be proud of. But going back fundamentally to your question, I would say certainly futuristically, from a student perspective, someone coming out of school should be able to operate in the modern world. And that's why we say, for example, you should be exposed to coding. You should know that coding is a language. It's to some extent the language of the future. The same way you know English. And certainly we'd want our students to be bilingual. We'd also want to add a third language, coding, because it allows you to operate in the 21st century. We would want a student to know our Grenadian history or Caribbean history, to understand the creativity of our people, because I think that's one of the unique features of Caribbean Grenadian life. How explosive our creativity is, how talented we are, how despite the challenges, we've been able to accomplish things that other people can't accomplish. We can talk about our sportsmen and women, right? So we have to engineer that sense of pride, that sense of accomplishment, that sense of despite the odds, despite our sizes, despite being abandoned, or foreparents being abandoned by our former colonial masters, we have built a civilization. So to me, that is what you want, a Caribbean Grenadian citizen that first of all is proud of who he is or who she is. Second, that can operate in the modern world, that doesn't feel disadvantaged by not being properly educated. Right. So I think it's a fascinating conversation. It's one that I think we need to have more of, so that people understand that your sense of who you are largely will determine whether you're successful or not. And if you don't spend some time paying attention to that, building that cultural, social, religious, spiritual side of who you are, then ultimately, when the pressures of the modern world gets to you, you may buckle. So I think it's important, even in the modern world, for us to understand the preservation of our culture, the preservation or giving our citizens the ability to continue to be creative, to understand our history, and to really appreciate, in a sense, that despite the odds, we are in fact successful people. I know it's easy to beat up on ourselves. I know it's always sometimes easy to curse one another, to complain about our political leaders, etc., etc. But if you look at the dramatic strides Caribbean civilization has made, I would say from the abolition of slavery in 1838 to now, it's phenomenal. There are large parts of the world which, to use the Grenadian term, just the other day, has only now gotten into the modern world. You can take a place like China, for example. It is rarely over the last 50 years that China has been brought into the modern world, and there are large parts of the world still that is to some extent in the medieval ages. So I think we need to recognize how fortunate we are, but not take it for granted, and to build upon that.
Let me just, probably last question on education. And is there, as we spoke of healthcare, a movement towards having an audit of the human resources within the Ministry of Education and education providers? There is a trend, when you have a successful principal, you bring in the ministry to do an administrative job. You might be an excellent principal, doesn't mean that you're an excellent administrator. So is that type of movement to ensure that this transformation you're speaking of through education can occur, because we do have the right people in the right positions?
So yes, the audit must occur, and I think you've summed it up neatly by giving the example of the principal and the administrator. But it also comes back to a question of what do we value. You see, if we believe that being the chief education officer is superior to being the principal of the school, then that sort of thing will continue happening, because we are sending the message that you need to move up the ranks, and that's how you measure success. But if you truly appreciate what education is about, which is the impact on building the next generation, then if our principals are good, unless the principal really doesn't want to do the job, and in most instances they're passionate about their kids, then you'd recognize that an administrator is different from a principal. And so that sort of audit, as you pointed, has started. It will continue, and it will be on us to make the necessary changes to improve. But education is one area that creates robust debate, both amongst the folks at the Ministry of Education and amongst us, the policymakers, because we truly understand that I think this is an opportunity for us to really begin to reshape how we view our education system. And we may not all get it right. Have to start, and that's why, for example, I've pushed for coding. We may not have the curriculum right as yet, we may not have all of our teachers trained as yet, but we must start. Too often we use wanting to get it right as an excuse to not get it.
I heard a quote from Dr. Dickon, who said that some of the people who are probably most resistant to change are actually educators, when they should be agents of change. Yes. So you probably have your work cut out for you there.
No, and that's understood. Change is hard. If you're used to doing things a certain way, the disruption that comes with it oftentimes put people on the back foot. But the technology, if we don't change, the technology is going to change, and the disruption isn't going to be greater. And I use this example because I talked about it at the CXC. There are hundreds of thousands of courses online. Right? And if we don't pay attention to that world, for example, you may quickly find that our own academic credentialing becomes irrelevant, because more and more people are moving to that kind of platform. It's accessible 24 hours a day. It's cheap. It's becoming accepted worldwide, right? And so we need to pay attention to some of those things and be part of the change, rather than be the ones stopping the change.
All right. Prime Minister, before the producer beats me up, I think we do need to take a break. So we'll go to a commercial break, and we'll be back. And when we come back, we'll be speaking agriculture.
We We all have wishes at Christmas. Maybe it's a car, repairs to your home, new appliances, or travel. Get yourself that perfect gift with a GUT Credit Union Christmas Make-A-Wish loan. You can get the money you need to make that holiday wish come true. Apply for a loan and you'll be entered to win one of 5 shopping sprees at Foodland Supermarket. Plus, great prices from Sol EC Limited, Dean Mattresses, Digicel Grenada Limited, and Beacon Insurance. Call 440-1354. Email loans@gutcu.com or visit go.gutcu.com/Christmas. Apply now and make your wish the perfect gift this Christmas. Special conditions apply.
Get Rubigas. Get cooking. Rubigas, clean, safe, and reliable LPG is the perfect solution for your commercial and everyday needs. For cooking at home or barbecuing, choose Rubigas LPG cylinders. Available in a variety of sizes from 20 to 100 pound cylinders. Rubigas LPG, clean, safe, reliable. Are you cooking with Rubigas? Get Rubis, get going.
For over 80 years, we have been the trusted friend you relied on for comfort, support, and guidance. At Lacroix Brothers, we continue to provide the professional quality services you need when a loved one passes on. And now, for your convenience and added financial ease, we offer specially designed funeral packages for only $6,000 VAT inclusive. Special conditions apply. As you plan ahead, we have removed all enrollment fees for our burial society. This offer ends December 31st. Enter your loved one into eternal rest. Visit Lacroix Brothers Funeral Home for greater choices at the lowest possible prices. Select a package that brings added comfort to the entire family. Serving you from locations in St. George's, Grenville, and Carriacou. Telephone 440-2302. Call us any time of day or visit www.lacroixbrothers.com. Lacroix Brothers Funeral Home, continuing a proud Grenadian tradition of excellence.
Welcome back, viewers. We're speaking with Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell, and we're transitioning now to agriculture. When we hear your administration say agriculture, and of course agriculture is a priority, what can we anticipate will be the areas of focus in this transformation?
Well, I would say a couple of areas. One, food production. Because we believe food security is critical. And to that extent, we've embarked upon an ambitious program. We've gotten emergency funding from the World Bank to deploy this year. And you know, implementation is a challenge for governments and governments of the past in particular. So we are really keen to try and ramp up food production, not just production, but the storage and the distribution of food as well. And we want to link that to a school feeding program for one, and to have more direct linkages with the tourism sector in particular. That's one. Two, we want to bring technology to the process as well, and we want to ensure that we encourage our agro-processors as well, and I'm saying agro-processing here as in food preservation, particularly to become a more central role in our food security. And to that extent, the physical infrastructure, the chillers, the blast freezers, to allow us to preserve, dehydrate, and preserve food, and then the communication and the PR that goes with that. You know, it's cliched, but we really do need to go back to eating what you grow and grow what you eat, and in some cases preserving it so that you could eat it in times of scarcity. Right. You know, we could just take mangoes and all the fruits and all that goes with that, but a lot of it comes from the fact that there's no centralized collection, storage, preservation, and distribution of food. Providing, and therefore we want to target young people in particular to be innovative and to use the technologies that are available to ensure that they can get in agriculture, see it as a business, and that's why I say food, because I think sometimes when you say agriculture, it paints this particular kind of a picture. And so if we talk food production, I think it gives a different vibe as to what it is we're talking about, as well as to build the fiscal incentives around it. It's no longer just simply saying give a farmer an incentive for a truck. You know, and it's also about sensitizing our people. So, you know, if you're doing vertical farming and if you're doing containerized farming, what is the equipment that you'd be importing? It's is dramatically different
Right.
from, it perhaps might look more like a plumber. It's dramatically different from the knife and fork and the hoe and that sort of thing. So that's one aspect of it. But going back to a more traditional type of agriculture, we've talked about this, and we obviously will begin the process of implementing the national spice replanting, because outside of a sense of pride, it has a significant impact on our forestry, on land slippage, because that's one of the issues we haven't addressed since Hurricane Ivan. And obviously the economic long-term benefits. In a sense, you may almost say it's the lazy economy, because you plant the nutmegs, you have nothing to do, you wait, and then you simply go and you pick the nutmegs up. So ramping that up, continuing to support our chocolate industry, and again creating the linkages between that and tourism is going to be critical. Livestock is another major area that we want to focus on, because as you know, we're importing all our meats, and it's questionable whether they're healthy. Well, healthy by my standards, for sure, given the mass production of meat and food that comes from the industrialized world. So we obviously want to focus on that, and then obviously fishing. Right, and to a large extent, while it's good to certainly continue supplying the market with fresh fish, we also want to engage in the fish processing. I read a paper that was done in 1989 by persons who are still around, that was talking about doing a simple fish sticks processing plant. And I was scratching my head to realize that's 1989. That's when I entered presentation college.
Yeah.
99. 2009, 2019,
right.
2023.
So we hopefully will not let 2029 take us.
And we don't have a fish processing plant here. And then you have fishermen complaining about the fact that they either have to dump fish or the price is so low it doesn't make any sense, right? And yet still we import fish sticks, which is essentially dehydrating fish and breading it and then packaging it and freezing it. Probably by the hundreds of thousands. I'm sure the hotels are importing them by the hundreds of thousands, right? And it just demonstrates how much, a sense, we have not really connected the dots.
What is the government strategy? Because you mentioned that a couple of times. What is the government strategy on having those linkages from our agricultural products, whether we're talking the cash crops, etc., to get to hotels, to get to restaurants? You did mention part of the school feeding program, but we must be intentional in ensuring that there is more local consumption across the economy.
So I think the strategies we need to have from our perspective, public-private sector involvement in this field. Right? I think to a large extent we have left the distribution of food in Grenada with no coordinated approach. You have MNIB, we can talk about that another day. But outside of that, if you look at the private sector, internally it is not involved in the collection, storage, preservation, and distribution of food. The model is the other way around. They import, they collect, they store, and they distribute. So if you just stand on any given day and you look at Grenada, we have food trucks going all around. But whose food are they distributing? Imported food. So our strategy is to turn that around and to say to the private sector, obviously you can continue, but we are happy to partner with you so that we do the opposite. So that we first collect our own food, we can store them, we can distribute them, and that we can create the direct linkages between the hotels and our farmers. And what we really want is to achieve two things. One, in periods of high demand and limited supply, to ensure that we have the storage, we have the preservation necessary to ensure that the market remains regulated. In periods of oversupply, that you don't create the glut and the prices drop. And that's where the storage, the mass storage, that's where the preservation and so on comes in, but more crucially the planning. Because we have to get to the point where all of this is data driven, and given technology today, there's no reason why we should not be able to get from all of the hotels how many hundreds of pounds of tomatoes they would need consistently during the peak season, during the low season, and then be able to work that information back directly to those who are producing to say, to meet the demand and to keep the guaranteed prices that we have contracted with, because this is critical. You have to have guaranteed prices. And in my view, we have to have direct buying and selling between our producers and our big consumers, the hotels, etc., the supermarkets, etc., so that the farmers know that you have guaranteed contracts. And to me, that is where you require the public-private entity. It can't be the public sector alone. It can't be government alone.
Let's speak of public intervention, though, and I just want to touch on one thing: poultry. 80+% of the chicken that we consume is imported.
Yes.
And then there's one challenge that the poultry farmers will speak of would be Caribbean agro.
Yes.
How is government going to address this?
So, well, first of all, we need to speak to Caribbean agro because we have to have the conversation, and we have to look at seeing how we can deliberately, without putting anyone out of business or jeopardizing the business, drive the cost of feed down. That's the reality. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is that we have to, in a sense, work hand in hand with our trade policy to make sure that, again, if we are trying to encourage local production, that similarly there's support in terms of limiting the amount of imported chicken that is to some extent sometimes dumped, because you get it obviously dramatically cheaper than anything we can produce. But at the end of the day, it means you are essentially taking money out of the country and sending it away. And it also means having that conversation with those who are in that market, in the importation and distribution market, to have a conversation to see whether or not they will be courageous enough and take a more long-term view to see whether or not they to invest in local production. Because there are other examples. Barbados has done it. St. Lucia's has steadily over the years increased its uptake of local chicken consumption, and I think we can certainly do the same. So I don't think it's impossible. There are other considerations. If the more mechanized you go, electricity costs and those things matter. But I think also there's an element of eating healthier, and I certainly think the local chickens, in my view, are healthier than a lot of the imported stuff that you get. And not only that, because consuming fresh food is better, right? And that's just the reality. So I think we also need to look at how we work on that.
Okay. We are on to agriculture. Tell us how the administration intends to reconcile farm assistance versus the debushing program. How can you keep Grenada beautiful, but at the same time give important assistance with labor to achieve the spice replanting initiative, to open up the roadways and avenues for nutmegs that probably been undermined since 2004 and we have not been able to access?
Right. So you can't keep Grenada beautiful 3 times a year. You have to keep Grenada beautiful all the time, right? And so to that extent, the debushing program is really a seasonal program that operates 3 or 4 times a year. Carnival, Christmas, Easter, or when children are going back to school. That's not sustainable, all right? So, and it will not enhance the beautification of Grenada. So the beautification process and the maintenance process, the process has to be ongoing. Now, you have a group of government employees who've been styled as environmental wardens. And in a sense, their loose job is to, in fact, do that. Help with the drains, help with some of the bushing, etc. But there's been no real plan. The average Ghanaian probably hasn't heard of the term environmental wardens. Probably would have difficulty identifying them on the road. They have no uniforms, no tools, no protective gear. It's not clear what hours they work. It's not clear what the job description is. The reality is, though, they work for the government, right? So let's just start there. If they're permanent employees and if they're working for the government, let's first start by enhancing them and empowering them, providing them with the tools. They have to bring in the current construct, they have to go get the weed eaters, they have to go get the cutlasses, they are paid minimum wages, they have no safety or security here. To a large extent, little or no supervision. And they've been used to some extent as political football, right? And I'm saying this to you because that's where the tribalism comes in, where we then encourage our people to fight, government change and they ain't changing this ward and they ain't changing that ward and that sort of thing, right? So essentially, the strategy is we need to raise the profile of these persons, empower them, provide them with the tools, and say to them, this is what we want. Train them. Right, so the planting, the grooming, etc., is going to have to be ongoing, right? If you are going to plant flowers and so on, if you're going to clear or roadways, if you're going to plant palm trees, etc., etc., if you're going to cut the grass and so on, that has to be going on ongoing, right? So to me, you already have a significant cadre of persons who are permanently employed by the government, but whose profile have not been raised, who've not been trained, who've not been looked after. If we continue with tribalism and we terminated them and bring in another set, they're the ones who are most vulnerable, right? So that's just on that. So the beautification, the best program, is meant to turn that around and create permanent employment for persons who can permanently beautify, maintain, and take care of the country. And obviously, we want to have a lot of volunteers in the spirit of nation building to take part in that initiative. The farm support, the farm labor support, has been a program that's been ongoing. We are also looking to relook that and to critically let the farmers have greater input into how that support is provided, because the challenge you find is that not many people want oftentimes to consistently do the farm labor support because of market conditions, right? If you're paying them less than what they can get elsewhere, then obviously they will go elsewhere. So as a government, we have to make the hard choice as to how much we do want to subsidize agriculture, farming, and food security. The big boys are doing it.
Yes.
And certainly we have no difficulty doing it. I mean, we have more limited resources, but I can certainly say that we are committed to it because it's more productive. If you can boost agriculture, if you can boost food production, it redounds to the same benefit of those who are providing the farm labor support, because you can in fact continuously employ them because the economy is growing and they too can have benefits. So that's really the strategy that we intend to take. From time to time, you may need, based on any number of issues, to boost the numbers in one group or the other, but we don't see the two as inconsistent.
Okay. You said another conversation, but so we move into the other conversation, and I'm going to use a bad word here, MNIB. Yes. I know that on Wednesday you're moving to some public consultations on MNIB.
Yes.
Share with us just philosophically what are your thoughts on where we should be with this organization that was created in 1973. I sometimes struggle with why marketing and import, but as I would have investigated, the import really was to assist the farmers in doing their job, and the marketing was to find markets and so for them. There was a reinvention of the MNIB during the revolution. Are we at a stage again, or I hope we're not too late, in reinventing, retooling MNIB for 2023 and beyond needs?
Yeah, there's no question it has to be reinvented. It has to be retooled and reimagined. And perhaps I dare say maybe even the name no longer in use. The truth is, it is not doing any of what you just described. And it is a significant strain on the government coffers. And so we need to take some bold, decisive action. We are meeting with the farmers tomorrow and Wednesday. We had a meeting with the staff of MNIB last Friday. We also met with the union on Friday as well. So to some extent, the time for acting is now, which is why we're having the consultations. And I think coming out of the consultations, then obviously we will engage the public further in terms of the way we would like to go.
Okay. Seeing that there are consultations ongoing, I wouldn't drill down more on MNIB, but so that I will bring up another pet peeve of mine, GCNA. Yeah. Grenada was the second largest exporter of nutmegs in the world for a number of years, and we broke. I don't know the second largest exporter of anything in the world who is broke, even probably the common pin. So I'm not going to ask you how we got here, but what is your outlook on a GCNA? I know the last administration was speaking of a merger between the Grenada Cocoa Association and GCNA. What is your outlook for moving the nutmeg and cocoa industry forward? And I'm deliberately staying away from GCNA and GCA.
Production. I think, unfortunately, I always give this because it's cliched and it's ironic. GCNA doesn't produce anything, right? Its members does. Yet still, GCNA at one time was perhaps the single richest corporation in Grenada, and testimony to that was the fact that it owned, and to some extent still owns, some of the largest buildings in all of the city centers or town centers in Grenada, and that's testimony to the wealth that was created by the nutmeg. But GCNA doesn't own a nutmeg plantation. It doesn't own a nutmeg farm. In all of the years of existence, it never occurred to those who were running it to invest back in the very said thing that gave it wealth, which is the production of nutmegs. That's the challenge we face today still, right? So it owns buildings, which has nothing to do with nutmeg production. It owns a large complex, which has nothing to do with nutmeg production. And so the question is, what do you do? What is your core function? What is your core purpose? And I think that's the question that GCNA should ask itself. And if it really is about nutmeg production, nutmeg farmers, then to me that's where you should be investing. In the nutmeg farms, in beefing up production, right? The real estate and so on is a consequence of your success in nutmeg production. And I think if that focus is taken, then the nutmeg production will continue, because I stand corrected, but I believe we're importing nutmegs.
I wouldn't want to go there. But what I will ask is whether you also believe in keeping with the increased production, whether we shouldn't move into secondary production, because we know of the uses, not just in food, but the pharmaceutical industry, the cosmetic industry, the petroleum and aviation industry. Shouldn't we be attracting those?
But to do that, you need to get the production up. Okay. Because the thing about agro-processing and with manufacturing is that once you start, the supplies need to be constant. And you can't end up in a situation where you invest in a plant and today you have nutmegs that tomorrow you don't have. So that's why I started with production. But I mean, it's a given that you obviously want to do the agro-processing rather than exporting the nutmegs raw. And the fact that we still do that is mind-boggling. There's just no other way to describe it. So that's, Colin, I think the challenge about change. And how difficult it is to change, especially if it's the same person who's been there over and over and over. I once was a director of GCNA, and we used to get into arguments about whether or not it was more beneficial to engage in agro-processing, and I was always stumped. I'm like, that shouldn't even be a conversation. You shouldn't be having a conversation about whether it is better to do your own agro-processing. But it's the mindset. So if this is what you've known, this is what you've done, you want to keep doing it. So that's the challenge. So I think, how that will change, honestly, it's difficult to say, because GCNA is made up of the farmers themselves. They control GCNA, while the government has reps on the board. They're in the minority, so they can be outvoted every time. Right. So it's really a question of whether over time the reality will dawn that you need to focus on production of the nutmegs themselves, increasing the production, increasing the yield, perhaps even experimenting to see whether there are other species that can deliver the crop in a shorter period of time, in different climatic conditions, etc. So that's part of what I would think the focus should be on, because there's a lot of synthetic nutmegs and all these things on the market. Right. And I think even recently we had some challenges with India in terms of how you define what is a nutmeg. And so there are a lot of issues that we face in terms of protecting our farmers and protecting our production. And to me, that is where the focus should really be. And if we can get the production up, which is why you need the spice replanting, right? Because it's not just for this generation, the next generation, because we inherited it. And if we can do that, then I think we can certainly help in the long run.
If we talk about shifting mindset and next generation, I'm going to throw one last agriculture question on you before we go to the phone lines. The marijuana industry.
Yes.
What is the thought process of the administration the marijuana industry, and have you identified a niche market that Grenada probably can leverage some type of competitive advantage in order for it to be lucrative as an economic tool?
Yeah, we haven't identified a niche market as yet. So that's clear. That's part of why we've set up a commission or committee to really do the heavy lifting to guide us to where we want to go. As I've said, it's really about the medicinal marijuana. Or commercial uses of marijuana. Having said that, we also recognize as well that it's a misallocation of resources to criminalize a plant that has the levels of commercial and medicinal uses that I think everyone has accepted it has. So there are two aspects to it. Obviously, we don't want to keep wasting state resources, arresting people for a spliff and that sort of thing. It makes no sense. And the police are better off doing proper policing rather than chasing someone for a spliff and so on. At the same time, we don't want to send the message that this is carte blanche situation where anyone can consume and grow marijuana as they wish. That's not the intent. Alcohol is regulated, cigarettes are regulated, and similarly, the marijuana industry will be regulated. So the intent is to have a regulated industry, a licensing system, but also some restorative justice. because at the end of the day, we have to look at the persons who persisted over the years in trying to, frankly, educate us properly about the plant. And in this part of the world is the Rastafarian community. So some special regard have to be paid to them. And I call it reparative justice in terms of how we treat with what has happened, as well as persons who've been criminalized for simple possession of marijuana and all of that. So there's some social work, some justice, some legal work that has to go towards that as well as towards protecting our population. Because it's big business, and if we don't craft a homegrown solution and we simply open up, you know what's going to happen. People with money are going to come in, they're going to probably acquire lands, and then they're going to probably outplant and outproduce our local people. And so we want to make sure that production in particular stays in the hands of Grenadians. We certainly would welcome partners when it comes to the manufacturing and perhaps some of the development of the byproducts and that sort of thing. But I think it's important for production to remain in the hands of Grenadians so that we can control what happens.
Okay, thank you very much. Viewers, I believe it is time for us to take our third break, I think it is, and then when we come back, we certainly would entertain some calls from you.
GBN Television News at 7, a pulse on all things Grenadian. Look out for our new features through expanded synergies with our media partners in Barbados, St. Lucia, Jamaica, Trinidad, and beyond. Capturing the latest in news, sports, weather, and entertainment. Credible, informative. Thank you for making us number one. News at 7, live, Monday to Friday on GBN Television, Channel 7 and 11. K105.5 and 105.9, Hot 98.5 and 98.7, GBN Television Facebook page and YouTube channel, and www.gbn.gd. GBN, with you anywhere and everywhere.
You know, one day I woke up and, they painted a set of pedestrian crossing all along the streets. Nobody told us how to use that thing properly.
I know how.
You're serious?
Every safe, good driver knows about these things. As a driver, you have to be very attentive. You know you're coming up close to a pedestrian cross, you start slowing down immediately, looking to see if there's any pedestrian on the side getting ready to cross. If there is, you stop on the line that is a certain distance before the crosswalk. Then you would see the pedestrian put their hands out, looking directly at you, indicating that they are going to cross. And only when you have come to a complete stop, that is when they will quickly and safely cross to the other side. And then you continue happily on your journey.
Stop, look, hand out, eye contact, wait for pedestrian to cross. Then you happily continue on your journey.
This message is brought to you by this group of insurance companies, the Traffic Advisory Body, and the Traffic Department.
Welcome back, viewers. We are speaking with the Prime Minister. He was, of course, addressing healthcare, education, agriculture as part of the transformative agenda of his government. We give you an opportunity now to ask questions of the Prime Minister. We did have on GBN an invitation out for people to submit questions, and those were incorporated in the conversations that have been taking place over the last hour, well, more than an hour, and some 90 minutes and counting. But you have a chance to call in now, and we'll be happy to entertain some of the calls. Prime Minister, while we await the first call, you introduced the term at the ministerial level, creative economy. What we do, okay, so we do have a call. So caller, go ahead.
Mr. Host, and also to the Honorable Prime Minister, Happy New Year to both of you. I have many questions to ask, but I'll only focus on two. One is that some years ago, crime and violence was listed as a public health concern in the Americas. I don't hear the government mention anything about that in terms of a public health point of view. Bearing in mind the situation in neighboring Ireland, just today, my heart bled when I heard the news of a 6-year-old being killed as part of the ongoing violence there. What are we going to do? Are we have any plans to really incorporate concerns about crime and violence as part, in terms of managing things? And the other question has to do with the role I think that community development plays, and there seems lack of understanding that in order to do community development, you need to have trained people. Years ago, when I was part of community development, I didn't get the training, but I know other people were trained through the auspices of the British Overseas Development Division. Some of those people are still in government. I am certain that in recent years, not one person has been trained in community development. And I think if the government has to succeed in its transformational approach, you must have a strong cadre of community development personnel, whether you call them officers or what. Can you speak to that?
Thank you very much, caller. So crime as a public health issue and specific training in community development.
Right. So I'll take the community development question first. And the caller is right. We recognize that, we don't have local government. And to a large extent, I think part of the challenge is that the central government is often divorced from the day-to-day challenges within the communities. And so it's important for us to, in fact, have a strong community presence. We have, in fact, just today, as luck would have it in Cabinet, approved 15 community liaison officers as a starting point to begin the process of rebuilding the community initiatives. And the aim really is to begin the process of strengthening the relationship between all community groups, whether they're sports groups, cultural groups, etc., and the government. So that we can start the process of helping to strengthen them, helping to encourage them. But the caller is right. It would also mean these officers need to be trained, need to be resourced, need to understand the challenges that they would face. What are the cultural nuances? What are the do's and don'ts when it comes to the communities? Where does the line begin and end between, in a sense, the most central roles of dedicated ministries, etc., etc. So the training is something that we certainly have to embark upon, and I thank the caller for pointing that out. He indicated that there are some persons who are trained who are still around. Obviously, we'll have to find that out. The truth is, Colin, to some extent, we are picking up the pieces in many regards. Social community development was neglected or frankly politicized or tribalized. And there's an entire booklet written, in my view, as a policy on how to do that, which we can share, which unfortunately is wrong. So to some extent, weaken significantly the Ministry of Social and Community Development to do a lot of the community initiatives and development initiatives that we wanted, and instead it was just passed along through party offices, which then were doubling as parliamentary offices as well. On the issue of crime and violence, as Minister of National Security, the safety of Grenadians and the safety of Grenada is paramount in my mind. And we do recognize that as a region, although Grenada may be an exception, that crime, violence, gun trafficking, gun crime in particular, is a significant public health risk. And so I've taken a zero tolerance to gun violence and illicit possession of firearms in Grenada. And I have no apologies for that. That from a public policy point of view, even the issuing of licensed firearms is going to be significantly restricted. You have to demonstrate a need for a firearm before you get one. Because we recognize that the trafficking in small firearms, well, in some instances, large firearms, is a major public health and national security threat for the region. Grenada may be an exception, but you could look at what's happening in Trinidad, in St. Lucia, in Jamaica, we can go on and on. Perspective, given our location between the south, the north, given our porous and open borders, given that we island nations, I do not take for granted the safety of Grenada. And that's why it's also critical for us to pay attention to the levels of poverty and to make sure that we tackle it head on, because poverty oftentimes is the source of the social instability, of the crime and the violence that oftentimes comes with it. And so we have to pay attention to our vulnerable. We have to pay attention to our young men in particular, and we have to use data and target from the schools, going back to the community, and ensuring that our communities are looking after our young ones and our young men in particular, because let's face it, if they're criminals in Grenada. They somebody, son, daughter, cousin, father, brother, as the case might be. So it's really important for us as a nation to recognize that, in a sense, our own standard of living is largely dependent on a safe and tranquil nation, and that's not something we should. It's something we should be proud of, but it's something we should not take for granted. But it is something that is foremost certainly in our minds as a government.
Okay, excellent. I'm certain that we have another caller, so we'll go straight to the phone.
Yes, good evening. Good evening both to the host and to Mr. Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, I beg to deviate a bit from the original trend and to ask this very important question, which I've been seeking clarity for a very long time. Our country does not possess a Constitution Act. Neither does our country possess an Independence Act, the documents which gives faith, legitimacy, legality to the state that we live in. In addition, only recently we were told, in no uncertain terms, in a proclamation by the Governor General, that we live under the rule of a king. I would like to hear your views on that, Mr. Prime Minister, and how long you think that we should continue to live under these circumstances with the existence of the United Nations Convention, not convention this time, but Declaration on Decolonization. Thank you very much and have a nice evening, will you?
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister.
All right, well, I'm not sure if I should give my personal views. I think I've already shared my personal views on the issue, which is I don't even believe in a ceremonial head of state. My view is we're too small to afford an executive head of state and a ceremonial head of state. But that is the situation we've inherited. And to change that requires you to change the Constitution. And to change the Constitution requires the population to want to do so via the form of a referendum. We've been down that road recently. It appears the appetite was not there. For us to really effect that change, it requires all of the political organizations, certainly two main ones and all of the others, to not play political football and to agree and go to the public united and join that this is the position, this is where we want to go. That requires us to form that political ethos that says this is where we want to go as a nation. I think my view of saying I'm not even in favor of a ceremonial head of state is perhaps the most extreme in the region, because people replace the Governor General with a president that does the same thing. To me, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, and we simply can't afford it. It's the trappings of statehood, in my view, should be functional, not ceremonial. So from that perspective, that's my personal view. But you're not elected to govern purely because of your personal view. You have to govern with the practical realities of the situation. And so yes, it will start with education. Yes, it will start to having the conversation. So I'm glad that the caller was being provocative. I think it's an issue he's consistently raised. Yes, there is no Constitution Act. Yes, there is no Independence Act, as in the legislature didn't pass any of those acts. And for the simple reason, we were not independent states. And effectively, our colonizer, i.e. our ruler, essentially devolved the Constitution onto us. And in that context, that is how we became an independent state. Now, we exist as part of the Commonwealth. We retain some of the trappings of colonialism, the Privy Council, the Queen, now the King, as in a sense, the ultimate head of state, with the Governor General being his representative. That is the constitutional, ceremonial, colonial setting that we inherited. So as citizens, yes, we have to ask the question, do we want to continue this? And at what point does the majority say, we've had enough? and we want to simply have a Grenada with a Grenadian head of state, period. That is a question for us to answer. There's a question for us to debate and to decide. Perhaps with time, we're approaching 50 years as an independent nation with some trappings of colonialism still next year, and maybe it will be an opportune time to really start a serious debate. Hopefully that's not tribalized or not politicized. But you know, one of the persistent symptoms of colonialism is self-doubt. Right? And people cling on sometimes to things from our colonial past and elevates it to some sort of superior, sometimes almost godlike cultural superiority that really stems from the fact that colonialism essentially dehumanized the colonized and made you think that everything that came from the colonizer is superior to you. So when people cling on to things like the Privy Council because they say, well, we can't, or judges are this or judges are that or whatever the case is, a lot of it is just self-doubt. It's a refusal to believe that you are good enough. You know, when everything out of Europe or the UK or the US is better, it's that persistent self-doubt that sometimes we don't recognize. So
we do have another caller, so I wouldn't even get a chance to do a jab at your fellow attorneys who want to be QC and now KC and hence stall the process. But let's go online for our caller. Good evening.
Good evening, Prime Minister Mitchell. Good evening, Mr. Dow. Quick question for the Prime Minister. Your administration is yet to name new diplomats for various missions around the world. My question to you is, any indication when this announcement will be made? Because I do recall the announcement of the recall of all diplomats and a review of their appointments. Thank you.
All right, thank you, caller, for the question. Now, we anticipate that in the coming weeks we will name our diplomats. And let me explain. You know, recalling a diplomat, even though you announce it, they don't fly home the next day. You know, there are a number of processes and procedures that you have to go through. People have their families, they would have relocated. You know, all of those things have to happen. That's one. Two, there's some things that I think as Grenadians we need to accept about what has been going on in Grenada. If you actually look at who have been our diplomats and the number of missions, the number of honorary councils and so on that has been in place, you will see that to some extent the diplomatic corps, Grenada's diplomatic corps, the support staff, the support structure has been decimated. There are no career diplomats, and those who are left are not performing as diplomats. And so we now have to build an entire cadre of new diplomats, which means recruiting, training, educating, and stamping what we want out of our diplomats and the standards we expect. That is going to take time. So it's not just a question of saying John Brown is a diplomat. Right, when they've had no diplomatic experience, no diplomatic training, understanding what it is to be a diplomat first and foremost, and second, what do we want out of our missions and our embassies, right? And so we have to go through that process. We now have a relatively large pool of persons who've expressed interests. We're going through a vetting process. We're having the conversations. We're talking about what we want so that we can not just name a head of mission or a diplomat, but deputies that you can provide the support staff, etc., as well as rationalize our diplomatic missions. Because we've had traditional missions and has there been an examination, what are we getting out of having the posting there? What are the new frontiers we want to tap? You've heard us talk about our diplomatic relations or the lack thereof with Africa, with the Middle East, and need to forge closer synergies with regions and countries that are more akin to us and that can perhaps truly begin to help us in terms of some of the areas that we want to go. So I appreciate that the general public may seem 6 months has passed and we haven't named most of our diplomats, and that is true, but that is the reality we face, and it is better for us to get it right and get it right slowly than to rush ahead and get it wrong. So to that extent, we certainly expect that in the next 2 weeks or so, we will be making the necessary announcements as to who will be heading up our missions in the respective embassies across the world.
Prime Minister, let me just say thank you. We invited you here for 90 minutes. I do recognize that it is closing in on 2 hours, and your time is valuable. Before we were chit-chatting and you said that you're up close to 2 o'clock this morning, and it's been a long day. So we will look to close the program, but just some final thoughts that you'd want to share with our viewers in closing.
Well, first, I believe this is your maiden hosting of Beyond the Headlines. So let me congratulate you and congratulate GBN on having you. I think you've done a fantastic job. Maybe one day we can turn the tables and I can...
I'd look forward.
So I want to wish you and your family all the best for 2023, and as I started, best of health. But to our citizens as well. I think this is an exciting time for Grenada. It's important for us to work together. We will have disagreements, we'll have debates. That is healthy. That is democracy. We need to encourage that. That is how we get the best ideas. That is how we test our ideas. But ultimately, I think we all want the same things, as I've said. We want better roads, we want better healthcare, we want better education. We want the next generations of Grenadians to feel that we have left them with a Grenada that was better than when we found it. And so it's important for us to bear that in mind. We're not doing this for ourselves. We're doing it for the next generation of Grenadians. It is not always going to be instant coffee. I am sure there are times when the public will be frustrated. I'm sure there are times when the ministers will be frustrated. But ultimately, we all Grenadians seeking to walk the same path with the same goal in mind, which is to really continue building on our Grenadian civilization that our parents have left us with, so that we can make Grenada a better place. So I just want to thank all of the citizens of Grenada for the endless prayers, support, encouragement, relentless bouts of advice that I get daily. Keep them coming. Even if I may not respond sometimes, obviously it doesn't mean I'm not hearing them, seeing them, or reading them. And we want to encourage Grenadians to get involved in nation building, because the nation belongs to all of us, and it's important that we all do our part. So thank you, and all the best for 2023 again.
Thank you so very much, Prime Minister. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for kicking off 2023 and setting the right tone. It certainly was a pleasure having you. And to you, the viewers, thank you so very much for joining us here on Beyond the Headlines. We kept you up, some of you past your bedtime, and we thank you for that. Join us again in 6 days and 22 hours for another edition of Beyond the Headlines. I'm Colin Dow. Good evening.